Welcome to our discussion on the Polish general election coming up in a few days on Sunday, October 15th. Widely viewed as a critical test for Polish democracy, important not just for Poland and the post-communist countries of Central Europe, but for the European Union and beyond. Our event reflects the wide geopolitical importance of this moment. It is being brought to you by three institutions: the Center for European and Eurasian Studies and the Social Science Institute at National University of Ireland at Maynooth, the Institute of Public Affairs in Warsaw, Poland, and the Democracy Seminar and the Transregional Center for Democratic Studies at the New School for Social Research in New York. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Jacek Kucharczyk, political sociologist and analyst, president of the independent Warsaw-based think tank, the Institute of Public Affairs. Jacek is an internationally recognized expert and commentator on contemporary Polish society and politics, and we are grateful he is here with us in what is a very intense and busy time for him and his country. The panelists and commentators include Professor Elżbieta Matynia, professor and chair of sociology and professor of liberal studies at New School for Social Research in New York, where she is also the founding director of the Transregional Center for Democratic Studies. Elżbieta is a political and cultural sociologist, recognized for her research on democratic transformations, gender and democracy, and the challenges faced by democracies emerging with a legacy of violence. Professor Jeffrey Goldfarb is a cultural and political sociologist, senior fellow at the Transregional Center for Democratic Studies, Michael Gellert Professor Emeritus of Sociology at New School for Social Research, and currently a university professor at American University of Afghanistan. He's also the co-executive editor of Public Seminar and special advisor to the provost of the New School Publishing Initiative at the New School, where he also runs the Democracy Seminar, one of the co-organizing institutions of this event. John O'Brien is a professor of sociology at Maynooth University, where he holds the Jean Monnet Chair in European Integration. He's the founding director of the Maynooth Center for European and Eurasian Studies, which is a designated Jean Monnet Center of Excellence. He's an expert on the European Union institutions and politics, especially EU's enlargement policy. I'm Hanna Czerwinkova. I'm the professor of anthropology at Maynooth University and a faculty member of the Maynooth Center for European and Eurasian Studies. I'm a political and educational anthropologist with focus on East and Central Europe and its socio-political transformations. I'm also a graduate of the New School for Social Research and alumnus of the Transregional Center for Democratic Studies, and I'm honored to chair this event. We will begin with a 35-minute opening remarks by Dr. Jacek Kucharczyk, followed by 10-minute comments from each of our three panelists. We will then proceed to questions from the audience and further discussion. Please type your questions in the Q&A space on Zoom. We will aim for our meeting to end in an hour and 25 minutes. Thank you all for coming, and I give the floor to Dr. Jacek Kucharczyk of the Institute of Public Affairs, who is joining us from Warsaw.
And thank you, Hanna, for this kind introduction. And I wanted to thank all the friends and colleagues who are involved in making this seminar, this discussion possible. And thank you for the opportunity to actually discuss the context and importance of these coming elections which will happen this Sunday. So basically, to explain what's at stake and what is happening here in Poland, I wanted to speak about several different aspects of the election campaign and elections themselves. Firstly, I wanted to start with what is at stake at these elections, why they are so important for us here in Poland and maybe beyond Poland, as far as I can tell from the big interest, let's say, from media and colleagues in academia. Then I would like to discuss the playing field, which is important in this case. By playing field, I mean the whole system of running the elections, but also some other elements that will surely influence the outcome. Then I will briefly discuss the key players, the key political groupings, and the issues that are behind the electoral competition. And as the second part of this presentation, I wanted to say a few words about social divisions and the social context of the elections. And especially I wanted to make comments on three issues, which is the general public mood in Poland, and then the role of divisions, especially the demography in the elections, the divisions between younger and older voters. Thirdly, I wanted to speak about the role of women, perceived and the actual role of women in the elections, because this is one of the things that makes these elections quite extraordinary, is the amount of time and attention devoted to women, both as politicians, but most of all as voters, as the importance of women as voters. That's I think something very special and worth noticing. And finally, I wanted to say a few words about international context, if there is time enough, but I will be happy to leave that topic to John, who wants to speak about especially the European context, which is quite crucial here, although there are some other aspects of the elections and why they important in this international context. So as I said, I wanted to start by saying or telling you a little bit about how the two key players, the ruling party and the opposition, define the stakes of the elections. I will start by the opposition because by telling about how the opposition defines it, because it seems to me that this is not just the politicians of the oppositional parties, but a lot of expert community and international community which sees the elections, their importance in this way. So for the opposition, the elections are basically about the future of Polish democracy and the position of Poland within the international democratic community. So after 8 years of the government of Law and Justice Party, we have a situation when of constant democratic backsliding, which was most noticeable in the changes to the judiciary system in the country, that caused also a lot of social protests in Poland over the years, but also intervention of some international institutions, most notably the European Union. So the opposition basically says that these elections are the final test of Polish democracy, the last chance for the opposition to change the government through democratic means, through voting system, because if the Law and Justice Party is elected for the third time in office, they will close down the system in the way that Orban did in Hungary, make it almost impossible for the opposition to effectively challenge the ruling party. And this will be by further changes, first of all, to the judiciary system, but also dealing with what's left of free media in Poland and the civic society. So in a way, this view, as I said, is shared not only by politicians, but also, for example, by majority of civil society organizations, which felt that the space for their action has been shrinking over the last 8 years, and that this trend will probably lead to even more severe constraints to their activities after the elections. If you look at the dominant narrative, or let's say the arch narrative of the ruling party, these elections are also highly important, sort of beyond the usual electoral circle. The way the ruling party defines the elections and what's at stake is nothing less than Polish national sovereignty and independence. Basically, the ruling party claims that if the opposition takes over in Poland, they will make Poland dependent on other agents, mainly on German interests. This anti-German motive. It's the dominant motive in the let's say communications of the ruling party. And the only way to preserve the Polish independence and sovereignty against Germany, against Brussels, which in their view is run by Germany, is to re-elect the Law and Justice Party. So in a way, it's that's even maybe even higher stake in this narrative than what the opposition says. And it's very closely related to their campaign against the key oppositional parties, which the propaganda, the media of the ruling party is trying to depict as representing not Polish interests, but some foreign strange interests, or perhaps some minority interests, but definitely not the interests of Poland and the Polish people. And it really sets the sort of frames the mood for this campaign, which is extraordinary, let's say, both violent and emotional, even by the standards of very emotional Polish politics that we saw in the previous election campaigns. So the playing field, and this is a crucial consideration in these elections, that after the 8 years of this government, the playing field in Poland is strongly tilted against the opposition. So they developing the campaign and fighting for the office in very adversarial conditions. And this starts from the fact that the whole electoral administration has been remodeled by Law and Justice Party, whereas before it was overseen by judiciary bodies. These days, the main bodies responsible for validating the elections and setting the rules are largely controlled by the ruling party, and that includes the National Electoral Committee, but also the new chamber of the Polish Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has always been in charge of validating elections, but as part of the so-called judiciary reform, PiS created a new chamber of the Supreme Court, which is staffed with political appointees of the Law and Justice Party. Most of the lawyers and independent experts consider the way it was elected as unconstitutional and illegal. Nevertheless, this will be the body that will rule on whether the elections are valid or not. So that's one aspect of this unequal or uneven playing field, but there are others perhaps even more important. The most important aspect is actually unequal access to resources. That is the fact that the government is using basically not just the public media, which it turned into a propaganda tool for the ruling party to the extent that we haven't seen in Poland since the fall of communism, actually. Some people think that it's even worse now than the propaganda during the martial law, and I think that there is something to be said about this view. But there are also resources from the companies that the government controls, which are channeled to the campaign, despite the very strict regulations of campaign finance that we have. You may have heard that the government decided to hold a referendum on the day of the elections. And the primary reasons why this referendum has been announced is actually that it allows unrestricted financing of what they call a referendum campaign, but the referendum is so strictly connected with the topics of the campaign that in fact it provides a way for unrestricted financing of the electoral campaign without any transparency and without the control of the National Electoral Committee. So that's another reason why the opposition really has to fight this this campaign with one hand tied behind its back. I might use this metaphor. There are two other aspects I wanted to mention in this context. One is something we saw before in electoral campaigns, which is the engagement of the Catholic Church on the side of the government and the ruling party. That was already the case in 2019, but now it's also a player with a very big influence, especially in the rural areas where the government is particularly strong and when its support is very solid, and the church is sort of not an sort of this a distant player, or it's basically engaged in the campaign on the side of the ruling party. And last but not least, the atmosphere in the country and the threat of violence or even actual violence is one aspect which is also used by the government. Especially the police in Poland has been quite heavily, and secret services, that they have been quite heavily used against the opposition, and there is a fear that in the post-electoral context that can also be a factor. But there is a lot of online violence against oppositional candidates, so which also sets the context for this campaign. So let me move to key players and issues of this campaign. As I already remarked, there are two dominant narratives, and one of them is by the ruling party, which basically says that its re-election is it's something that will make Poland independent from the threats. Also, the war behind Polish eastern border is one of the issues often mentioned by the ruling party. In fact, the key electoral slogan is about keeping Poland safe Poland, and this issue of safety and security is the dominant issue on the side of the government propaganda. Then, as regards the opposition, we have one key oppositional party, which is the Civic Platform, whose leader is Donald Tusk, who used to run Poland for 7 years between 2007 and 2014. And then he became the president of the European Council, which is the highest position that any Polish politicians has held in the last 30 years. He came back to Poland to rejoin the opposition with the sole aim of taking the Law and Justice Party out of office. And the main issue that the party speaks about is the state of democracy, and reverse the course towards authoritarianism, and what the opposition defines as towards this authoritarian model, and not outside of the European, or let's call it Western democratic standard, because this is one of the frequent references in this campaign. And then on this scene we have three other important players, even though according to opinion polls each of these three other parties enjoys support, mainly one-digit support, but the way they perform will be crucial to the outcome of the elections, because if you believe the opinion polling, that none of the two main parties seems to have a chance of forming a majority on their own, so they will need coalition partners. And the two other parties, one is the New Left, which is solidly polling around 10%, and I would say that their place in the new parliament seems to be quite ensured. And there is a sort of newcomer, another let's say oppositional and democratic formation or grouping, which is called Third Way, and it consists of the oldest and the youngest party on Polish political scene. It has been steering sort of away from this polarization and tried to get the voters who are neither the supporters of Law and Justice or Civic Platform. They haven't been as successful as that was thought, and now are struggling around 8%, which is the electoral threshold for coalitions. But the situation is such that their success, that is, if they are elected in the parliament, then it's quite possible that the opposition will have majority of the mandates. However, if they fail to get the 8%, that means that it is most likely that the Law and Justice will benefit from these votes cast for the oppositional parties and may be very close to being re-elected for the third term. So basically, on the fate of this one coalition, the whole project of the democratic opposition in Poland now rests. And then last but not least, there is the Confederacja or Confederation, which is a far-right group whose main characteristics are, I mean, they are both nationalistic, xenophobic, also one of the parties, probably the only party on Polish political scene which was taking an anti-Ukrainian stance after the outbreak of the war, even though they modified this position because the public mood was actually very pro-Ukrainian, and instead they focus on the issue of taxation and social spending. So this issue became at a moment one of the crucial and winning issues, because the very generous social spending from Law and Justice Party was one of the pillars of their electoral support. But at the time of high inflation, it became a more controversial issue, and Confederacja actually drew its support from the fact that some segments of the society felt that this generous social spending actually fuels inflation and is lowering their own living standards, and that became one of the winning points. So they sort of reinvented themselves as a party of economic, like libertarian party, really demanding the abolishing of the not just the peace subsidies, such as the famous child subsidies, but basically the most of the institutions of welfare state. So they're very modeling themselves after the American libertarians in a way. And for a while they had a two-digit support and were seen as indispensable coalition partner if Law and Justice is to rule after the elections. Now this is less obvious, but they will almost certainly be in the new parliament and will be an important presence in this new parliament. So if I could ask now for the first slide, I wanted to show you a bit of the social context for these elections. The next one, please. Yes. There will be two slides illustrating the public mood in Poland, and they may look a bit complicated, but really what you need to know from these slides is that unlike in 2019, when Law and Justice was fighting for re-elections in a very good, the public mood was very good. This is the green lines dominating over the red lines. The economy was in great shape, and that was felt, and large part of the society felt that part of the sort of this good feeling was Law and Justice, social policy, the social transfers. And in fact, in 2009, elections was not fought on economic issues, but on these social-cultural issues, such as the position of the state, the so-called traditional family, and so on and so forth. Now, during these elections, the social context, the public mood is very, very different. That is the dominant mood is negative. People feel that that the things in the country, the situation develops in the wrong direction, and even though it improved slightly in recent months, it's still the Law and Justice is fighting for re-election in this context of the general public being quite unhappy with what's happening in the country. As I said, the main motive of this unhappiness is the sense that there is a crisis of cost of living, inflation, and that government policy is fueling that inflation. But also, if you look especially at oppositional voters, for them the concern is also about democracy, as well as women's rights, which is also an important context of these elections. If I could have the next slide, please, where we see the ratings of the government. And once again, the story told here is quite similar. The first term of office of Law and Justice, or the second term of office of Law and Justice Party, has been they began the term of office with very good public mood, which helps to explain why they managed to win the elections in 2019. The government ratings were quite positive, and then something changed in November 2020. And if you follow Polish politics, maybe you will remember what that was. And this moment when the two lines are crossing, I think it's quite fascinating, is the ruling of the Constitutional Tribunal on the on the abortion law. And very strong women's protests against the changes and against this very restrictive new abortion policy. And as you see, that this seems to be like a breakthrough moment in terms of Polish politics, or the society's attitude towards this government. I don't mean to say that this was the only reason why the ratings of the PiS government have changed and consistently remained in the red. But it was clearly a breaking point, and they never regained the popularity they had before. That was also the question of the politics during the pandemics, the handling of the pandemics, and so on and so forth, and the worsening economic situation. That's definitely part of the picture. But I think it's very interesting to know that the moment when things changed was actually the protests. And even though they were quite brutally suppressed by the police, the government has never regained popularity after these protests. If I could have the next slide, please. Then I wanted to mention one key social division to understand the context. And on one hand, you have the protests and inflation, which makes this government popular. But here is one of the diagram, which to some extent, and I think largely explains why this government and the ruling party has remained the leading political force in Poland, despite the broad disenchantment with their government. And this is the change of the proportions between the older and younger citizens. As you see here, in 1997, the proportion of people who were below 30 years old and above 60 years old was more or less similar. And that was the year, by the way, when Civic Platform captured back the power from Law and Justice Party after just 2 years. Largely it was due to the young people's support that they obtained against law and justice. Now, in 2023, these proportions are very, very different. We have almost 10 million people above 60 years old and less than 4 million people, young people. And the whole politics of law and justice, its famous social policy, largely consists of keeping these people who are, most of them are retired now on pensions, to keep them happy, completely neglecting the interests of the younger generations, or at least this is the feeling among the young people. And if you could show the next slide, please, you will see how it impacts policy. Here there is a different age division. It's below 50 and over 50. And you see the voting intentions of these two cohorts. And you see that for people below 50, only 20% wanted to vote for Law and Justice Party, whereas for over 50, it's as many as 54%. So there is a clear generational difference in Poland, and law and justice strategists know it and concentrate the resources and propaganda on this group of older citizens who are more easy to persuade that, for example, traditional Polish family is under threat, and who are easier to persuade that migration is a threat for them, and so on and so forth, and who are also quite happy that they remain the center of attention also in terms of financial policies, because Law and Justice was famously paying out additional pensions just before the election. So now we have, I mean, usually they receive 12 pensions, like 12 months, but now we have 13 and 14th pension. And as it happens, they always paid out just before the voting. Please, the next slide, please. So once again, this is a diagram which illustrates which parties people definitely will not support. And as you see, among the youngest cohort, those who declare that they will never vote for Law and Justice Party is almost 80%. And then it falls, and then the number of people who will not vote for the key opposition party grows with age. So I would say it shows how the age difference has become quite crucial to the Polish politics, and why oppositional parties are trying to get the support of younger voters, because they know that the mood in this group is particularly hostile to the government and it being re-elected. However, again, the challenge for the opposition is that not only there are fewer younger voters, but they are also more reluctant to go and vote. So the older voters, and this is not only the case of Poland, are much more disciplined when it comes to to voting. The next slide, please. Yeah. So very briefly, and maybe Elżbieta will comment on this and expand, the women in the elections. And this is the diagram which illustrates how many women are on electoral lists on average. And it shows that even though the number of women on electoral lists was pretty more stable over the last elections, in fact, in these elections, the number of women running for office is the highest ever. The breakthrough here was the year 2019, when compulsory quotas were introduced. So the legislation actually helped a lot to make women more visible and more present on electoral lists and in Polish elections. If I could have the second diagram. And once again, this shows you how different political parties distribute the places on electoral lists. And the places are crucial in Polish politics, because basically, if you are on the number one in your district, your chances of being elected are much, much higher than on any other position. And the placement of women on these first places has been part of the discussion and pressure from women's lobbies. And from that point of view, the most pro-women party is a bit surprisingly the Civic Coalition, which put more women than the New Left on the electoral list. And not surprisingly, Confederacja, the far-right party, is the least, let's say, women-friendly from that point of view. I will also say, and there is no slide for this, that if you look at electoral programs, the platforms, and the communication of political parties, basically, and it's a campaign like none other before, because each party is trying to present an offer just for the women and activate women as voters. So this is especially characteristic of the New Left, which put a very, very extensive and substantive, I would say, agenda for women. But also civic platform, which made a very important step, if you know the history of this party, and they basically declared that they will liberalize the abortion law if they are re-elected with sufficient majority. That was and this issue seems to be important, the most important communication to women from this party. And it's a real change, because it's basically traditionally a sort of center-right group, quite conservative, which before it lost power, basically protected the so-called abortion compromise, which meant that abortion was banned in all cases, but in all but few cases. Now they came around, and this is connected with this perception that women will decide the outcome of the elections. So basically, I'm almost over with this presentation. As I say, it's important also in the result will have important implications for the international partners of Poland, such as Germany, the EU. But I will leave John to comment on that, and then if there are any questions, I will be happy to answer. So thank you for this opportunity, and yes.
Thank you so much, Jacek. That was wonderful. John, over to you.
Thanks so much, Hannah, and thanks, Jacek. That really sweeping and expansive survey of the electoral landscape in advance of what I think is an absolutely crucial election, not just for Poland, but for Europe. We tend to say that a lot about elections, but I think this one really, really matters. So just some brief comments, and I'm going to focus in particular on the rule of law and what the European Union has done and has not done in the 8 years since Law and Justice came back to office. I think Jaroslaw Kaczynski was admirably clear at the time when he said that it was his intention to establish Budapest on the Vistula. He was, of course, referencing Viktor Orban and everything he had done since he came back to office in 2010 in Hungary. And I would say Kaczynski has been as good as his word. The rule of law has been thrashed in Poland, and I think it's the opinion of many scholars, whether they are lawyers or political scientists or others, certainly civic activists, people in the European Parliament, that the regression in the rule of law has come about as the result of a very deliberate strategy being pursued in both Hungary and in Poland, and that the European Union response has been inadequate. So what did the EU do? Well, firstly, I think we should note that when people in the Commission or elsewhere say, look, we had no toolbox for this. This had never happened before, and certainly it never happened in this kind of scale. There was, of course, this assumption in 2004 that Hungary and Poland were the most prepared candidates for membership, and that once they took on the obligations of the acquis communautaire, what you would see was an even closer convergence between all of the acceding states and the European Union norm. So what happened is this very deliberate decision to step back from those obligations and to deliberately engage in a process of state capture, literally the capture of what had been previously independent and impartial institutions, including the judiciary, the media, universities, and any sites of potential opposition. So the EU, because it hadn't faced this before, was ill-equipped. I get that point and I concede that point. The member states really do not like interfering in the domestic politics of their fellow member states. So people, for example, talk about the role of Germany. It's been very ambiguous. I agree, but there are good reasons why the member states don't interfere in the politics of neighboring states and those that sit around the table with them at the European Council. The bigger issue, I think, has been, and the responsibility lay with the European Commission. Why? Because it is the guardian of the European Union treaties. There are many who argue that it was asleep at the wheel after 2010 in the case of Hungary and 2015, where they should have been prepared, because even at that point, political scientists were writing about the authoritarian playbook. And you could see that what was happening in Poland was almost the mirror image in many respects of what had happened previously in Hungary. There was and there remains a procedure within the treaties to potentially tackle democratic backsliding, and that is the so-called Article 7 procedure. But we saw from the beginning the really strong preference of the Commission for dialogue over confrontation. This has been a central theme in the approach of the Commission all the way through until, I would argue, relatively recently. The efforts that were made to institute Article 7 procedures, first against Hungary, or first against Poland, a procedure opened in November 2017 by Frans Timmermans, the then European Commissioner, subsequently gone back to Dutch politics, and then in September 2018 by the European Parliament. And the Parliament has been one of the most active European voices in trying to amplify Polish civil society and the concerns that they were raising about the different things that Law and Justice was doing to damage and roll back the rule of law, that the progress that Poland had made. So Article 7, I think many people will know, is almost inoperable. If you read through the different clauses of it, you can see that the threshold for gaining agreement, even to move from the first to the second part of the article, is extremely high. And where you have allies sitting in the European Council, Hungary and Poland, and by the way, we're going to have another ally very shortly, because it looks like in Slovakia, the new coalition headed by Robert Fico shares many of the same kind of tendencies. There are also critical differences, but that's potentially another ally. In my view, Article 7 just does not work. So what else did the European Union do? Well, the Parliament was active in issuing resolutions. There were individual parliamentarians like the German Green Daniel Freund, Sophie van Enterveld, and others who were extremely active in raising issues. The Commission eventually decided that it had to take action. So what it did was to use the so-called infringement procedures, which sees the Commission have the ability to refer individual member states to the Court of Justice of the EU. So belatedly, but I think with some results that are important. The Commission, in response to, for example, PIS's move to lower the retirement age for judges and prosecutors, went to the Court of Justice and was able to secure verdicts against the Polish government. In March 2021, the Commission again referred Poland to CJEU over the so-called muzzle law, the disciplinary chamber law. And after that was ignored, the Commission had to sort of up the ante. So in all these instances, the preference of the EU institutions is for dialogue and to resolve the problems amicably. But where you're faced with a government that's absolutely determined to do its own thing, and that is in clear violation of its EU obligations, we're in a completely unprecedented situation. So that's effectively what happened when Poland's constitutional tribunal ruled that some European Union laws were incompatible with the Polish constitution. I should say it's not the only constitutional court in the member states that done this. The German Constitutional Court at Karlsruhe has had lots of confrontation over the years, but has generally backed down in almost every instance where there was the real threat of confrontation between Germany and Europe. But what's at stake here is the primacy of European Union law over national law. I think what has emerged subsequently is messy, to say the least. Poland is being fined €1 million a day for its failure to comply with judgments of the Court of Justice. But I think, as a final point, to say that there have been some positive things as well. And in particular, the belated decision to use money as a key sanctioning or potential sanctioning weapon against member states in violation of their obligations, that has proved absolutely crucial. So you will remember that coming out of COVID, the European Union constructs this huge recovery fund, Next Generation EU. The monies due to go to Hungary and to Poland were eventually stopped because of the different failures to comply that I've just been talking about. And these are really significant sums. In the Hungarian case, about 16 billion euros. In Poland's case, about 36 billion. And I think the calculation belatedly was that, especially coming out of COVID, that these governments would have no choice but to eventually comply. And the evidence, I think, if we look at the evidence in both jurisdictions, suggests that that is far from having concluded. We've seen in recent days some suggestions that the Commission was about to give in on the dispersal of subvention to Hungary, in part because of its support for Ukraine, or potentially changing its position on Ukraine, where it's been very obstructionist and where there have been real differences, obviously, between Warsaw and Poland. So there is an enormous amount at stake. The Commission agreed these 280 odd milestones and targets to be fulfilled as a prerequisite for unlocking these funds for Poland. Now, I will leave it to my Polish colleagues to tell us whether or not there's been progress here. My sense is, reading the experts who really pay attention to this, is that it really hasn't delivered anything like the substantive changes that the Commission wanted. And you can see that reflected in the activism of civil society groups who are watching all of this very closely. There has been a suggestion that Poland's very strong support for Ukraine was potentially going to change the dial on the rule of law issue. That hasn't happened. I hope it doesn't happen. I think it would send a terrible signal to other states, including Slovakia with its new populist prime minister, that the European Union can essentially be blackmailed, and that the rule of law is not inviolable, that it is in fact malleable and can be manipulated without paying the severe financial price of being deprived access to vital European Union funding. So when we say there's an enormous amount at stake in this election, it is about the financial integrity and probity of European Union funding. We know that Law and Justice has targeted some of the communities that Jacek mentioned with European money. So there's a good argument to say that, in fact, the rebuilding of autocracy in both Hungary and Poland has come about with the expressed financial support of the European Union. That cannot be allowed to stand. And I think if Law and Justice are returned after Sunday in some new coalition format, we will probably again see a ratcheting up of confrontation between the European institutions and Warsaw. So to conclude, it's been a very difficult period over this last 8 years. Poland in many ways is an extraordinary material success within the EU. Anybody who visited the early 90s and then goes back regularly now can see the extraordinary change that has happened in Poland. The European Union has been part of that because of single market access and what it secures for Poland, but it's also about EU subvention. And in Ireland, we're really familiar with that story because it was very similar. Our modernization and our development was acutely tied up with our membership of the European Union, even if not in a straightforward way. So I hope that we're going to see a change in Poland on Sunday. To go back to the title of this event, I'm far from certain that that will happen. But because Poland has a hugely important role to play within the European Union now, the stakes are as high for the EU as they are for Warsaw and for the Polish people. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, John. Elżbieta?
So it is almost 10 o'clock in the morning in New York. I'm talking from New York, and I'm going to bring this a kind of different way of looking at things which are taking place right now in Poland and in Europe in general. So Jacek and John helped us to see that these elections, just like the coming elections in the United States, are indeed national emergency, but also emergency for democracy in Europe and beyond. So these are not normal elections. We will lose, we Poles in Poland, but also people outside who looked at Poland for many years as this, especially after 1980, 81, and in 1989, as the possibility that things could change, that actually things could change for better. We will lose everything that we gained since 1989. Now, the question is, of course, do people in Poland, or do people who should know it? And looking for this distance of time and space, one thing becomes visible, that there is this kind of move, and Poland is interesting in that because it's kind of closing the circle of a move. John was talking right now a second ago about Hungary and also about Slovakia. The circle of expanding, growing, and now dismantling democracy. So there was this threat of restoration. And we know how it happened. We did have a revolution, and the revolution was extraordinary. It was a change, fundamental change of the system, and it was negotiated. This revolution was negotiated non-violently. That revolution was very quickly undermined. It began to be undermined already in Poland and by Poles, by Polish politicians, political groupings, soon after 1989. And it's being completed, kind of, and the path to restoration not necessarily of communism, restoration of something else, restoration of the other system that we thought we said goodbye to, ultra-right, ultra-nationalistic, neo-fascistic future is something that we are facing right now. Poland was the first one to open the path to democratic transformation, the path to freedom. It is important right now, not just symbolically, not really just symbolically, to see how by using democratic tools and procedures, the dismantling of democracy is taking place. Jacek was talking about closing the system, indeed closing the circle. So if there is anything in Poland that Poland contributed in the 20th century to politics at large, the world politics at large, it was this non-violent systemic change. Un-revolution, revolution, right? New beginning, without violence, without bloodshed. And this is now not only being undermined, but we are gradually saying goodbye to it everywhere else in the world. So what we are facing now is counter-revolution narrative. And I'm talking about it because we don't know the results of the elections on Sunday, but we are worried about it. And I think it's very important that, you know, we are worried about what will happen in Poland. We are worried about what had happened in what is happening in Europe, including Germany, but also we are worrying about what is happening on this side of the Atlantic. So, so the counter-revolution narrative, which began in very early on during the process of transformation to democracy, but which became stronger and much more powerful and much more convincing to some in 2015, when Law and Justice Party took over, won the elections, and this is when the process leading to the restoration of ancien regime, except it's not communist regime anymore. It's something much more darker, something much more browner. It's something that reminds us of what had happened to the end of the, how the Weimar Republic had ended. So this is not a test anymore. The tests were successfully launched in Hungary and recently in Slovakia, and also in the meantime in other parts of the world, just as the Polish roundtable opened the path to transformation, democratic transformation and freedoms. These elections may open the path to restoration of what Tim Snyder captured in the title of his book, Unfreedom, Anti-Democratic Absolutism. So that will have tremendous implications, of course, for Europe, but again, for the rest of the world. So one wonders what facilitated this shift towards unfreedom. I'm not going to talk about it, but I think that we in the world have an incredibly short memory, but we in Poland have an incredibly short memory too. And I think that Donald Tusk, during this extraordinary March of 1 million hearts, was talking about it. Remember what we had. There were those moments and period of extraordinary public happiness because we did feel free. And in a certain way, that March brought that mood to the street. The question is this mood going to prevail or help to change the direction in which we are? We see that we are going. So Jacek was talking about the older generation, and we saw those graphs very very telling, and one would think that older generations remember the passions for democracy, for inclusivity early in 1980s and so on, but recently we always thought that older generation, the generation that could not catch up with the fast changes, and Jacek told us that is behind the drive towards restoration. But my question is about those small groupings which we are seeing in Poland, and Confederacja, right? Confederation is one of them, and a party of very young people. Look, we have to learn from what we are seeing on the road, and I think that this is incredibly important to see, or perhaps I should say, young males. They don't remember the public happiness of 1980s and the astonishing elections of 1989. And in the last 8 years or 10 years, they functioned, they lived in the environment of organized lies. So they don't remember. They don't remember fascism. They don't remember what their parents fought against. So we won't go far if we do not notice the attraction to symbols, to objects, guns, weapons, hatred of others, whether xenophobic or homophobic, and the feeling of loss of power over women. I'm talking about this particular group, but I think we can see those groups everywhere else on both sides of the Atlantic, and they're fairly well represented. In the recent conversation that I watched on YouTube, our colleague and friend, Adam Michnik, known for his quips, said that the leader of the law justice, Kaczynski, brought him back his youth. He returned back his youth back. Now, he didn't think about Faustian, of course, moment. He was talking about 1968 in Poland and what had happened to the student protests. He said, yes, he brought me back my youth. I was 22 then, but he was there with me. He was there at the university, and he knows the language. He saw the methods. He knew this is where Kaczynski was first introduced to the language of hatred. He never traveled. He doesn't know other people. He's afraid of everything. So I'm just. He was also talking about what Jacek was saying. Very important. There was this effort to reawaken various German obsessions in Poland against. Whereas we know the last 30 years or so, the biggest achievements was really changing the Polish-German relations. And Kaczynski destroyed it. I'm not going to talk about the movie of Agnieszka Holland. I want everybody to go and see it, but I think you can see that 1968 is kind of gaining momentum many years later, over 50 years later. Agnieszka Holland, the Polish film director, the director of The Green Border, had to have a bodyguards in Poland right now because she wanted to, and she did, say the truth. So what to do? How to stop the consolidation of this new dictatorship, and how to stop the march towards what appear to be a new fascism. I think we have new actors on the stage, and yes, women are some of them, and women who said we have enough. And this is incredible what Jacek showed on that one of those images when everything changes in the mood in Poland in November 2020. Now, in the midst of the pandemic, women went on the street. It was a desperate move. Just after the Constitutional Tribunal, made this extraordinary law. All judges appointed by the ruling ultra-right party, which tightened the abortion law. Almost all cases of abortion became illegal. I'm talking about that because I think there are people here who may not know about it. And a large group, masses of women went on the streets in masks. And that was the beginning. And this is when the so-called Polish, that there was this women's strike, and that those strikes then appeared everywhere, including United States, the women's strikes, and in Poland was charged as illegal. So now we have the upshot of that movement, which began to grow in 2020. We have a large group of smart, audacious, and imaginative women that entered public spaces, and their voices we can hear their voices and their messages. We are demanding inclusive citizenship. It's much more than just women's rights, not limited by political appointed judiciary and the preponderance of the Catholic Church. So this Sunday, on October 15, we'll see that upshot of the gain of this movement for the right to have rights. Number of women on the ballots. Jacek, so it was very impressive. Yesterday, a young friend from Wrocław sent me a recent article from Gazeta Prawna, which is legal gazette, with the headline, "Women will decide about the electoral outcome." My only wish, and you see, I'm absolutely I'm not very objective here because I worry about what's going there and here. So my only hope is that women will go to vote in as large numbers as they are actually already represented. And it's amazing that so many of them are in the civic coalition are high up on the electoral list. So I agree with Katarzyna Laubnauer. That's a challenging Polish name, who said in that interview for I think for Legal Gazette, who said these elections are about civilizational choices. Modern women or women pushed back to the Middle Ages, modern autonomous secular state, or dictatorship of those who do not want to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Elżbieta. And final comments to Jeff.
Thank you, Hannah, and thanks to my co-panelists for their interesting insights. As they know, I had some reluctance to take part in this panel because these days my attention is more focused on points more further east than Poland, in Afghanistan and among its neighbors. And I'm not following the election very closely, but I'm still, as I listen to my colleagues and as I read the newspaper and try to keep up with this, my adopted country, Poland, I look at the country with sadness because it seems to be representative, and this election is crucial in whether this is the case, that we're living in an age where liberal democracy, for all its faults, the era of liberal democracy as an ideal and as a practice is coming to an end. This is very, very obvious in my country, in the United States, because our elections have become elections between the pro-democratic forces and the anti-democratic forces. And if elections are about the fate of the system, we're in deep trouble. I first became engaged in Poland as a researcher, and Elżbieta Matynia was one of my first native informants about life in that country, first and foremost native informant. When I went there, I lived in the liberal democracy for all its faults. I was an anti-war activist, active in the New Left and all that, but still the country had a fundamental democratic system, and I went to what some would call a totalitarian system. I have some qualifications, I think, with that title, but there was a kind of totalitarian cultural order at the very least. And I started seeing, with Elżbieta as one of my guides, little kernels of alternatives emerging. And then the remarkable thing about my experience over the years engaging Poland from the early 1970s to 1989 is that these little kernels with some interruptions kept on growing and growing and growing. And then 1989, and the country became, in the language of the natives, a normal country, which meant it started developing a normal liberal economy. It started developing a normal parliamentary democracy. Its civil society appeared above. It came up from the underground and appeared and flourished in with marvelous colors and diversity. Something really major was achieved at that time. But I started seeing almost immediately after 1989, politics slowly started appearing as a struggle, the electoral politics, a struggle between the democratic forces and the anti-democratic forces. And for some period of time, the Democratic forces prevailed. But I remember thinking when that started happening that, my goodness, can you have a functioning parliamentary liberal democracy when each election is whether liberal democracy is about whether liberal democracy will continue to exist? And that has escalated. And now looking at the election today, as Jacek very clearly demonstrated, and Elżbieta kind of gave us significant kind of the texture of it, the cultural texture of it. And as John observes, how this is viewed from the EU with all its internal contradictions. And of course, all the internal contradictions of the EU is that now the EU in the foreseeable future may include illiberal democracies. So how can, if the EU becomes a body that includes democracies and forces that are anti-democratic, how can it monitor the democratic health of its member states? And that's in fact, I think, what this election is about. It's election. I look at the election with sadness because no matter which way it goes, there's the ongoing struggle in Poland is going to be, I fear, is going to be between the portion in a polarized society, between the portion of the society that is for democracy and the portion of the society that apparently, I think the adverb is important, apparently is not concerned about democracy. And ironically, this outcome is going, the pivot is dependent not on who has the majority, but on the peculiarities of the electoral system. The degree to which the electoral system is rigged by the ruling party. I mean, it's incredibly rigged by the ruling party. Who, a key to democracy is that the various political forces in the society have to actually appear, and the ruling party has control about who appears and who doesn't. The party, the oppositional forces are, as Jacek suggested, but I want to emphasize, are invisible in the countryside, both because of the way the public media work, and also because of the visibility that the church highlights on the ruling party. So we really can't even know what the public opinion is if it were free and fair in the countryside. And then there are all kinds of peculiarities about whether a portion of the population is going to be represented, depending on whether the vote is above or below 8%. So if it's not above 8%, if it's 7%, those 7% of the people are disenfranchised. They don't matter. So this very, very crucial election seems to be, its outcome seems to be in some ways a matter of chance. A chance in which, if I think of a Las Vegas gambling house, the house has it's I'm trying to think of the analogy, is stacking the deck. I'm really sad. I'm really concerned. I think that the outcome is not likely, from my point of view, from a democratic point of view, to be a good one. But there are grounds for hope. And I think that the grounds for hope should be considered. Young people, women, a kind of an understanding of what the stakes are, the big stakes, and also how the big stakes are connected, particularly for women, about on a matter of very, very personal, immediate concern. Many years ago, I had public discussions with a colleague, Ann Snitow, who was a major force in our in the New School's presence in East Central Europe and in the Transregional Center's Democracy and Diversity Institute held in Krakow and then in Wrocław. Hanna was an important force in making the latter possible. And we debated about the importance of gender justice relative to the importance of the primary commitment to democracy. And I think, and I, was of the opinion that to have a democratic system, to have create a democratic public, to make it possible for everyone to take part is the primary commitment. And she said, but Jeff, if women aren't included, how can you call it democracy? And that kind of debate is a eternal one. If some people are excluded from the democratic system, does that make it not democratic, or does that mean that it just has to be expanded? But I think that what we're experiencing now in Poland, and then now in the country that I'm very engaged with, Afghanistan, the crucial dimension, the key to democratic prospects seems to be how the rights and dignity of women are defended, and whether that motivates a significant portion of the population to change the direction of the tide. I hope, I look at Poland with sadness, because no matter what the outcome, the problem of the fragility of liberal democracy continues, as has been demonstrated in the United States when we defeated Donald Trump, and he never won a majority of the vote, and the population is clearly against him. But as he provides the alternative, and his followers provide the alternative, our democracy is weakening. So I hope the opposition parties put together a coalition that prevails. But I also should note that even if it does prevail, this struggle, this fundamental struggle about concerning the future of liberal democracy, in some ways has only begun. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you all. I almost feel like we should end here, but we do have 5 minutes left, and we do have 2 questions. So if you don't mind, there are more questions, but some of them have already been answered, so I will allow myself to choose 2. Let me first read this one. Given the generally anti-EU stance of the Law and Justice Party, what new trajectories might become possible if they emerge as the biggest winners in this election? Could a full exit from the EU happen? So that's one. And the other question that I chose is this. Poland has been a vital supporter of Ukraine's effort, and recent comments by the Law and Justice government have caused worry about long-term commitments. How much of this is just election talk, and how much of it might translate to actual policy? And I know those are big questions, so and we only have 5 minutes. So who would like to go first?
On the European Union question,
first, if you, or maybe John, do you want to
very
talk about the
quickly,
EU?
I'm really interested in what you will say about this, but I really don't see any way that any Polish government, even one led by Law and Justice, would even think about leaving the European Union. We have a template for this from 2016. And guess what? It didn't quite work out in the way that many of its advocates thought it would work out. All thought of Frexit, Czexit, Polexit, all of that bullshit was really just washed away, in my view. And Poland would be completely mad to even contemplate this. The EU provides this layer of security. It's not Article 5 of NATO, but it is another layer of security that really, really matters. And if you want to see why it matters, we just look at what's happening in Ukraine. So in my view, there's just no way, whatever the degree of tension and confrontation, that is not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, John. Jacek?
Yeah, I'm a bit more worried about this prospect because Law and Justice Party, in order to remain in power and to prolong its stay in power, has done some pretty crazy things. And this U-turn on Ukraine is one example of this self-harming policy from the national point of view. There are voices within the party among experts, media commentators, that this should be considered an option, like the exiting the EU. And there wouldn't be at any point popular support for this policy. So the British-style referendum seems to be completely impossible. But in fact, strangely enough, they don't need a referendum on that. If they wanted to do this, the simple majority in the parliament would be sufficient to declare it. That's the dangerous thing in Polish politics, especially if one of the possible outcomes of the elections, which is the coalition with Konfederacja, happens. And Konfederacja has been the only party which spoke openly about the need to exit the EU. So that would be crazy, and I agree with John, and that would harm Poland's interest and the societal interest in so many ways. But this government will go to any length in order to secure its continuation. And if the EU seems to put to them to put too much pressure, and I don't mean to say that the EU shouldn't put this pressure. I think it's the best, one of the best things that happened during the last 8 years was what John was describing, is these actions taken in the EU, including withdrawing funds. But we will definitely hear a lot of discourse about it and threats, and I hope they will never come true. But I wouldn't be 100% sure that this ruling elite is not crazy enough to perform and act with such consequences. And just, for example, the ruling of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal stating that parts of EU law doesn't apply to Poland, it's some experts described it as legal polexit. So it won't be like a big step like in the UK, but I think that our relations with EU, with this government, and possibly with Konfederacja also in power, will be very, very difficult.
Thank you very much, Jacek. We have this other question about Ukraine, what happened between Ukraine and Poland. But Elżbieta and Jeff need to leave. So if you need to leave, thank you so much. And maybe we can just answer this one question between John and Jacek. Elżbieta, thank you so much.
I only wanted to add to what John and Jacek said. I worry terribly, and I'd love to be as optimistic that we have that there is a reason. There is a reason, and it's just this is just for the public consumption and for the elections. But I would like to say that that there is a problem with me when I'm looking at the way the government engages with propaganda, and it is not that they lie, that they lie, but it seemed to me that their public believes those lies. They believe those lies. This is This is a very pessimistic thing. I'm usually not pessimistic, but I like us to know that. I have to go, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Jeff, do you want to say anything at the end?
I just adding to what Elżbieta just said, or highlighting what Elżbieta just said. This is the class distinction between traditional tyranny and modern tyranny, which Arendt defines as totalitarianism. That you don't tell lies to directed at your opponents, but directed at yourself, and you believe them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when this applies either to the relationship or support of Ukraine in its just struggle, or in Poland's relationship with the EU, what's likely to happen is a very subtle disengagement, not just an attack that we're now on Russia's side, but the quality of support will diminish step by step. And they'll be saying to themselves that they're still supporting Ukraine, but they won't be as effectively supporting Ukraine. And I think that's true of a Polish exit from the EU, that it's likely that Poland will not have a dramatic moment where it says, we're now part of the EU, but piece by piece, little piece by piece, it will, with exit, hoping that the financial support that is crucial to the Polish economy doesn't dry up. And in some ways, in the past few years, we've seen that process already going on. And I think it's very important that John highlights that the EU has to respond so that these this very subtle process of withdrawal, if not from the European Union, but from its democratic ideals, isn't successful.
Jeff, thank you so much.
Okay, so
thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. It's always wonderful to be with you and Jacek and Elżbieta, my old friend, and it's a great pleasure to meet you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for co-organizing, Jeff. Thank you for the Democracy
My
Center.
pleasure. Yeah.
So would you like, John, Jacek, would you like to comment on the question, the last question before we go? Poland has been a vital supporter of Ukraine's effort, and recent comments by Law and Justice have caused worry about long-term commitments. How much of this is election talk and how much of it may actually translate into reality?
I'm very worried about what happened, that was not just one slip of the tongue or not even a purely election campaign, even though there is a lot of it. Obviously, Law and Justice is worried about its support among the farmers because of the grain crisis and worried about competition from Confederacja. But in a way, on a deeper level, I think it's what happened reveals, let's say, the true self of Law and Justice Party, which is this party of national narcissism, basically, when everybody else is bad, is trying to harm us, and now Ukrainians are conspiring with the Germans in order to overthrow the Polish government. This is one of the very recent narratives. It's that since Ukraine, Germany is now in Europe the most efficient provider of both economic and military aid. The peace government has this obsession that they want to unseat them, and it's really the mindset that has revealed itself, shows that what happened after February 24 in terms of Law and Justice attitude was really an exception rather than the deeply felt policy that it's now we see what is their sort of true attitude to Ukraine, and of course it's terribly dangerous if they are re-elected, and once again the most damaging combination would be them and Confederacja in power. because it would make this damage even more severe and long lasting. So I'm really worried about it, and I wouldn't write it off as just campaign talk. That's
John.
Yes, I mean it's terribly important that the unity on Ukraine doesn't fracture, and it's not just about Europe, of course. It's about what's happening in Congress in the United States as well, and it may be about the sequencing of elections. I'm worried about the European Parliament elections next year because the far right is clearly surging in so many jurisdictions. Look at elections, regional elections in Germany last week, in Hesse, in Bavaria. The AfD is doing really well in Länder where it never did very well before. That's just one example. We could go on. The EU, I think, once this problem emerged in the spring, should have done what it has done before where there have been problems around agriculture, which is to buy people off. They should have gone to the Polish farmers and to the Czechs and the Bulgarians and others and said, okay, we're going to write you a check, because this cannot become a problem in the European Union support for Ukraine. It does, however, point to something really important in the enlargement process, which Ukraine is now part of, and which Poland, of course, was part of previously. And it is the increasing tendency over many years of individual member states to block the accession progress of individual candidate states. Now, this should be very unlikely in Poland's case because Ukraine is potentially a real ally sitting at the Council of Ministers table, but it's also a competitor. And we could see that clearly with agriculture, where in the late 1990s, early 2000s, most of the EU debate was about Poland and the imposition, financial imposition it would place on the common agriculture policy in particular, because it's a large state of 40 million people and largely rural and agriculture and so forth. The French were really, really difficult for quite a long time. They've continued to be difficult. But if Poland becomes an obstruction to Ukrainian progress, that is going to really damage the enlargement process just at the time when actually this year we finally have seen new momentum. The Western Balkan states have been waiting around for 20 years. There's immense frustration there, and there are real geopolitical difficulties between Kosovo and Serbia, within Bosnia and elsewhere. But in a way, the Ukraine war brought enlargement back onto the agenda. It would be really dreadful if a new Polish government became the main obstruction to Ukraine making progress. And within the enlargement process, it's very technical, but Ukraine has made incredible progress. Going back to 2014, it began to reorient its trade to the West and away from Russia after they signed the association agreement, which was so controversial at the time. And that has continued. And they're doing a lot of the technical and preparatory work, despite the enormous challenges that they face in public administration and every other area. So just at the time when we have this renewed momentum and where all of that is positive, and we're going to see real decisions taken by the European Council in its meeting in December, and I hope that will be one that sees Ukraine and other states make real progress. I dearly hope that Poland isn't going to become the kind of problem that Jacek, I think, suggests it could potentially be. It has regional responsibilities. They're really important. I mean, Poland's importance and weight within the European Union has increased a lot, not least because of its solidarity with Ukraine. It would be, in my view, terribly damaging to itself if it were to engage in that kind of behavior when it has actually helped to move the center of gravity of the EU a bit to the east over the last year and a half, despite all the tension with Brussels on the other issues we've talked about.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much, Jacek. I would like to also thank Elżbieta Matynia, who needed to leave, and Jeff Goldfarb. Let me also thank our two wonderful facilitators, Lala Pop in New York and Anne Hamilton Black here in Ireland, in Maynooth. Thank you both for fantastic job, and main thing, thank you all who made the time to come to listen to it, and let's keep our fingers crossed for a good outcome despite all of our worries. Thank you.
And special thanks to Jacek for that really fantastic presentation, where we are all interested in and worried about what's going on in Poland. It was really illuminating. So thanks so much, Jacek.
Thank you, Jacek, as always. Perfect.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, and I enjoyed it a lot. And thank you for the opportunity, and also from what I learned from other speakers. It was a great conversation for me. Thanks.